Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now to review some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Arise News analyst Emmanuel Efeni. Good morning, Emmanuel.
Good morning, Ruben. Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Leila. Let's start with this day newspaper. The lead story, Nigerians losing confidence in the electoral system, Jega warns, says declining voter turnout evidence of distrust. That's Muhammad Jega, the immediate past chairman of the independent electoral, Atahiru Jega, who is the immediate past chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. He should know, and part of his comment at that lecture yesterday, that we seem to have lost some ground since 2015. That is something that should be worrisome. That instead of making progress, building on the gains of 2015, when through innovation, introduction of technology, and we saw a better electoral process, things seem to have degenerated. But another thing, Ruben, I also believe is responsible for the disinterest of the Nigerian voter is what actually come out of governance, because they are not seeing the benefit of voting people into office. So it has also made a lot of Nigerians to be disinterested in voting, in the voting process.
Yes, between state and the people, between government and the people, and so people have come to assume that when people get into positions of power, they are not necessarily there to provide service, that they are there to pursue sectional and personal interests. So it's the specter of alienation in government-people relations in Nigeria. You are quite right about that. And I think that's part of, the distrust that Professor Jega was talking about. You're right about that. Okay. But he also talked, as I pointed out earlier, about insecurity. He also talked about this perpetual attempt to postpone elections. Usually when the people are so excited about the election, once you postpone it, people will say, well, let them go and do whatever they like.
Deflating their
enthusiasm, yes, which is what happened.
Especially when it's postponed hours to go.
From 52.3% turnout in 1999 to 67% in 2003, down to 44% in 2015 and 37% in 2019. I hope in 2023 we will not record 10% turnout.
And at the same time,
so
voter registration going up over this period.
Yes.
So there's actually a problem. Perhaps we need more voter education and confidence building on the electoral system.
I think we should dwell more on the side of the solutions. How do we solve the problem? What kind of reforms should we adopt? I think that's where
which they don't seem to want. So
dealing with the electoral act, amending it accordingly earlier in the day.
Not at the last minute.
When politics will have taken over the space. Let's move on, Ruben. Daily trusts, revenue crisis, tough measures inevitable, federal government. Senate warns against more borrowing. 5.4 trillion naira lost to tax evasion annually. That's according to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Experts, SMEs react. Yes, the Minister of Finance and Budget Planning was at the Senate yesterday, and she made the point that what we are having in the country is a revenue crisis and not debt crisis.
I have no idea what that means.
Yes.
No, actually, this has been a major recommendation by the Bretton Woods institutions that Nigeria needs to, diversify its revenue base, and that the collection of revenue is not good enough. So, but the minister saying our problem is not debt, that our problem is collection of revenue.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
That may be controversial because there are some Nigerians who insist that the country's debt profile is not sustainable.
Well, and if you have a revenue problem, you have a debt problem.
Exactly. But what is even more disturbing is the, revelation by the World Bank that only 3 states in Nigeria, are sustainable.
Yes.
Lagos, Rivers, and Akwa Ibom states. That is, only those 3 states can survive without federal allocation. Now, maybe a total of 19 states will also still be able to survive with, internally generated revenue and federal revenue allocation, where the other states are not viable. And this has been part of the conversation ever since. If you have just about 22 states out of 36 that can survive, then we'll have a very serious crisis of sustainable development. And that World Bank report was even saying that, look, even collection of VAT is not likely to make any difference. A higher percentage, 80-something percent of the VAT goes to the states. Even in spite of that, no difference will be made. So what is required is, creative thinking. If tax collection is the problem, well, the solution is probably, as many have pointed out, increasing or introducing more taxes, but ensuring that you widen the tax base and you capture more, those persons that are within the informal sector. All these ideas are out there. The experts have said this ad infinitum. What is important is both on the monetary side and the fiscal side for government to adopt the right policies and to see them through. But we seem to have a tunnel vision of how to, collect revenue or expand revenue or even how to diversify the economy.
And
that is where the problem is.
In this day, we also have a report of Fowler saying that Nigeria loses $15 billion to tax evasion yearly.
So?
Well, tax evasion is a crime. So what are they doing about it?
So
tax avoidance, however, is not a crime.
It's different. That's one thing.
The revenue crisis perhaps simply means you are not living up to your potential to get your revenue in, despite the fact that you have better capacity. You don't have the capacity to actualize your potential when it comes to revenue collection. I think that's where the challenge is, Ruben. Let's move on. The Punch newspaper, MDA's payroll system. Federal government ASU set for showdown over deadline. IPPIS is an illegality. That's the Integrated Payroll and Personnel Information System, which the federal government has said all government workers, MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies must be part of that payroll by October 31st. Otherwise, you'll not get paid. But ASU, the Academic Staff Union of Nigerian universities, they are saying they don't want to have any of that. Their reason, saying it breaches university autonomy. I don't understand, Ruben, because you can't dictate to your employer how you should be paid. If employer A says go to bank C, that's where you'll be receiving your salary. Say, now move to bank A, that's where I want to pay your salary. And you say you are infringing on my right of choice.
Well, in any case, I think the controversy over the IPs is unnecessary. Maybe ASU does not have enough information about what IPs is and its value. When IPs was introduced, the whole idea was to ensure transparency and accountability in the government payment system. And immediately after its introduction, it was discovered that there were many ghost workers on the federal government payroll. And IPs, has ensured greater transparency and eliminated, the number of ghost workers on the payroll. What I think is required is some kind of engagement between government and ASU to explain, to provide information, because although this may be academics, they really may not know how certain government processes work. And that's why I say, the controversy is not necessary. What you need is engagement and understanding on both sides. I'm sure that if ASU sees, in fact, what is involved, with IPs, ASU should be one of the major stakeholders saying, oh, this is very useful.
Yes.
It's not only for other people. ASU cannot just keep itself out and say there can be no transparency in the payment of university
because no matter
system
how
workers.
They feel, to tackle this, it shouldn't involve shutting down our universities, as they often do. Let's move on to other newspapers. Daily Independent. Minimum wage payment begins from April 18, federal government, and that's leading a number of other newspapers. The Guardian newspaper, government orders payment of new minimum wage from April 18, while the Vanguard, minimum wage, federal government directs payment from December 31.
Well, I mean, the payment since April 18 is a no-brainer. That was the date when the president signed it into law. And from the day of its effectiveness, then of course it ought to be paid. But the other leg of it is that organized labor at the meeting in Enugu, the Joint Negotiation Council that met in Enugu this week, they made it very clear that if anybody defaults, any state government fails to pay, that the Nigeria Labour Congress will not hesitate to provide the necessary support in the affected state for its members to take that state government to court. And I think that the various state governments should take particular notice of that.
Okay, let's move on to the foreign newspapers outside the shores of Nigeria. The Guardian newspaper, as well as many British newspapers this morning, police work to identify 39 people found dead in lorry, 38 adults and 1 teenager in horror discovery of this vehicle, this lorry carrying a container with 39 dead persons. And they are investigating that. The Daily Telegraph reports the same story. Human cargo driven to frozen fate. That's the Daily Telegraph of the UK. While the Times, lorry migrants froze to death. So it's a very sad one.
Yeah, people smuggling remains a major challenge in Europe. But this has been the most tragic incident since the case of 58 people dying at Dover Port 19 years ago. But what is interesting about this is that, many commentators have observed that the government had early warning signs that the particular port where this was found in excess, because it's not a very busy port, there have been signals, there have been warnings that that particular port could be used for people smuggling. But of course, the investigations have started. The 25-year-old man who drove this white truck, refrigerator, this iron of steel or whatever it is called, he's been interrogated. And the interrogation is from Ireland to Bulgaria to Belgium, to see what happened along the chain.
The roots of these persons and whether a gang is actually involved in this network.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel Efeni. Thank you very much indeed.